Go. Hey there, folks. Welcome back. It's been quite a year and one hell of a great day. So I'm going to give a quick shout out to democracy and all that is well in the world. And since book tour and conventions have still been on hold for a bit, I figured that I would bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 3, intriguing interviews with creative minds. It's great to see everybody again. And what a better way to kick off the new season than with an all-star panel, Rediscovering Star Trek, Explorations into a New Frontier. First up is my pal and Star Trek author and commentator, Keith DeCandido. Keith has been writing professionally for 30 years with more than 50 novels, 100 short stories, and dozens of comic books. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Russ. It's really good to be back on here.
All right, great. Also on our panel is my pal, Tyler Attico, a science fiction author, essayist, and contributing writer to the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. He's also winner of the Excellence in Playwriting Award from the Dramatists Guild of America and two-time winner of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds anthology. Welcome, Derek.
Russ, thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Love to see you, as always. And last but certainly not least, Jarrah Hodge is an award-winning feminist blogger and co-host of Women at Warp, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. She has appeared on NPR, CTV, CBC, and on convention panels across the US and Canada discussing the representation of women in Star Trek. Welcome, Jarrah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, great to see everyone. And a heads up to the folks at home, feel free to send me notes, or if you have questions for the panel, send them in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so let's jump in. So Star Trek has been a central element of science fiction and fantasy for more than 50 years. And in the last few years in particular, it's really seen an incredible resurgence. But before we kind of get into the details of it, I want to ask you guys, so what is it underneath it all for you that makes Star Trek such an appealing and an enduring franchise? Let's start with Derek.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Russ. That's a great question. Well, for me, over the years, I've boiled it down, and I think Star Trek has what I call the four foundations or four pillars of Star Trek: friendship, hope, science, and exploration. And if you think about it, every Star Trek novel, every Star Trek television show and episode and film, the cartoons, everything has those four elements. And those are elements that everyone identifies with, regardless of their ethnicity, socioeconomic status, everywhere around the world. We can all identify with those four things. And I think that is what has made Star Trek persevere and just have this incredible lifespan of 54 years now.
That's great. So I'm just say those four again.
Science, well, they're not in order, but whatever. Science, friendship, hope, and exploration.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right, Keith, what do you got?
The thing that I think is one of the most enduring aspects of Star Trek is that ultimately the show has always been about compassion. It has always been finding the compassionate solution, finding the diplomatic solution, finding the friendly solution, finding the solution that involves basically people being nice to each other, whether it's, realizing that the Horta is just a mother who is trying to protect her eggs, whether it's ending a war not because of your military might, but because you agree to cure them of their disease and stop the fighting that way. Whether and even all the way to the most recent Discovery, where a season of Discovery, where one of the big potential problems of the season was basically helped by being nice to somebody who'd been stuck alone in a place for a very long time. It's not about who's the strongest; it's ultimately about who's the nicest, and that's a really good and important message for people.
Okay, Jarrah.
Yeah, for me, it's about the infinite diversity and infinite combinations, and not just about the numbers of different types of people on screen and pushing the envelope at different periods of media history, but also about diversity as a value that we it sort of overlaps with what both Keith and Derek said. We go out and we explore and we have empathy and we try to understand where other people are at, and we view that with curiosity instead of fear, and delight in others' differences, as Gene Roddenberry said.
Okay, right on. All right, so Sort of from its earliest days, Star Trek has been a mix of exploration, action, and socio-political themes, especially given the world that we live in right now today. How important is it to you to have a vehicle through which the issues of the day can be explored and challenged? Derek.
I think it's everything. I think science fiction traditionally, even putting aside Star Trek for a second, science fiction has typically done that. And I think we have, as a society, especially an American society, has leaned in some ways on science fiction to do that. Now, specifically, Star Trek, I think in many ways has led the path on screen and held a mirror specifically, not just to the world, but I think specifically to America, and held a mirror to America and said, why are you doing this thing? You know, in the 22nd and 23rd century, we're not supposed to be doing this thing. The amount of melanin in a person's skin shouldn't be a thing. Wars between the same species on the planet shouldn't be a thing. Famine, poverty shouldn't be a thing. Homelessness shouldn't be a thing. And Star Trek takes that mirror and says to us, if it shouldn't be a thing in the 23rd century, then, you know, why is it a thing now? And it's in that science fiction arena that it can do that and do that so well and make us actually think about those issues and discuss them. And no matter what generation of Star Trek, you will have families that after an episode, they will discuss these things and they will say, hey, I wanted to be a doctor or a scientist because I wanted to do better. And I saw that thing in Star Trek that made me think I could do better. And I think that's the power of Trek.
Is there a specific episode or a specific storyline within Star Trek for you, Derek, that, you know, kind of on that socio-political line that says, you know, that one, that resonated with me, or that got me thinking?
Well, you know, Star Trek is very, it just has so many. You could go series by series. I mean, in TOS, I don't remember the episode, but when the species with their black on one side and white on the other.
Let that be your last battlefield.
Thank you. Let that be your last battlefield.
Is that Frank Gorshin?
Yep. It is. Yeah. And they've been warring. This species have been warring forever, and you know, Spock and Kirk look at them and say, well, you're white on one side, you're black on the other side. What's the problem? And they're like, how dare you? He's white on the left side. I'm black on the left side. And the insanity of that doesn't reach them, but it reaches us, the audience. It makes no sense to Kirk and Spock. And that's a perfect example. It's like, what are you people talking about? You know, then you can jump literally 50 years, almost 50 years later, and you can look at Far Beyond the Stars, which is another pivotal episode of Deep Space Nine, which shows the issues of racism and what it was like for author of color in 1950s New York City and you know, in society, in Earth, human society, and what they had to go through. Not just authors of color, but women and anyone that was other than honestly white males, and what they had to go through. And Star Trek has always been in many ways at the forefront of showing us these things are wrong. These things are things that we should not do. I mean, whether it was Kirk saying it, Cisco, Janeway, you know, or whether actually minor characters were saying it, these were always one of the themes in the forefront of Star Trek.
Jarrah, what's your take on sort of the, you know, the socio-political threads within Star Trek?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think that, you know, at times of, you know, increased national and international tension and economic struggle, we tend to see like a resurgence of these more kind of dystopian, like fear of alien invasion type sci-fi. And this is a pattern that's gone back from the beginning of science fiction, TV, and cinema. And Star Trek has always been a bit of a counter to that. And I think you can argue about whether New Trek does that, but I think it still has really important socio-political themes. And, you know, one example that just is the most recent one that comes to my mind is the episode of the most recent season of Discovery where they find the guy who's been sitting alone in a room with a Federation flag. And, you know, this sense for me, it's not as much of a really obvious metaphor as the half white, half black episode, but it's a really powerful kind of moment at a time when a lot of people are really struggling to find faith in our institutions and in, you know, science, in reason, in, you know, the ethics, the ethical framework that we have kind of agreed upon. So to have this example of a character that has, you know, sat in a literally very isolating environment and like kept the faith and held the space for what's right for so long, to me, that was a super powerful moment.
You know, until you just said that, I didn't really make the connection about this guy sitting alone in isolation for so long, but still holding on to faith. You know, that one slip right past. Now, whether it was intentional by the writers or not to do it that way, I don't know. But now that you're saying it, that moment really does resonate me instantly, sort of in a powerful way. I sort of skipped right over that. Keith, what about you? What's it for you? You're a Bronx boy who as we were talking
one
about
of two on the panel actually.
Yeah, right. You're another one.
The thing that I've always liked and has always been important to me in Star Trek is the fact that it shows a future of a united Earth. People sometimes, I think, forget now how really radical it was in 1966 to show the bridge of the Enterprise at a time when there was civil rights unrest involving people who looked like Uhura, when the US was embroiled in a war in Southeast Asia with people who looked like Sulu and who were afraid of getting into a nuclear war with a country full of people who sounded like Chekhov. To see them all working together on the bridge with all the white people, and not to mention the pointy-eared alien guy, that was huge. That was right away, just by a simple casting decision, showing that it's going to get better. That, you know, things look terrible right now, but we can come together. We should come together. And that has continued all throughout all of the shows. The number of science fiction shows where the primary lead is a person of color is vanishingly small. Two of them are Star Trek, Deep Space Nine and Discovery. And that's, you know, even still, that's, you know, even when you've got a diverse cast, usually the primary lead is still a white person. You know, the only other, there are a few other exceptions like Battlestar Galactica, for example, but for the most part, it's still the white guy in charge. And Star Trek has pushed against that more often, not every time, but certainly regularly.
Definitely, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that.
Yes.
As we get later into the show, for sure. It's a significant theme, and we'll get there. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. So Star Trek fans all have their favorite versions of Star Trek, their favorite storylines, their favorite characters, their favorite shows. I want to shift a little bit to some of the newer shows for a minute. So let's just take Picard, for example. You know, with him, we were reintroduced to many characters from Next Gen and Voyager. So I just want to kind of get your gut reaction on what's your take on bringing back some of those characters for, you know, where are they now, and doing a new spin on them, as opposed to just creating a new show with all new characters that's not connected to anything that came before it. Jarrah.
Yeah, I mean, I have very complicated feelings about Picard, but I will say that to me, my favorite thing was the revised 7 of 9, or, you know, 7 of 9 take 2.
She was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it feels like who 7 of 9, you know, how she was kind of meant to end up, in some ways. Like, you know, in Human Error in Voyager, we see 7 of 9 creates holo programs where she's like living out interactions kind of in her fantasy. She wears sweaters a lot more than she wears cat suits, and she also wears like uniforms. And so then, you know, she shows up and she still looks awesome, but she's also wearing like functional clothing, and she has this kind of more layers of emotion, and she has a chip on her shoulder. She's got an axe to grind, but she still has values, and she's fighting for the little guy. And I love the retake of 7 of 9 in Picard.
They need to give her own show.
Yeah,
and I hope they do. So what about Keith? What about you? I mean, what's your take on sort of doing a new spin on old characters?
What I like about Picard's take in particular is that we very rarely see our heroes when they're past their prime. We always see them when they're at their best. We see them when they're in the prime of their lives. Even in Picard's case, this was, his biggest. He was in command of the flagship. All the characters, we're seeing them at what is probably the most important time in their lives, or at least one of the most important times in their life. And I really like. I think one of the most valuable things about Picard is showing us a hero who is past that point. He's basically become irrelevant in a lot of ways. That the world has moved past him, and he's trying to figure out what to do now, and how his life has changed, and what happens to our heroes when they get really old. And that's not a thing that dramatic fiction does nearly often enough. And I think that's the most valuable part of it.
I think that that's kind of a fair point. It's most of what we watch, it's usually, like you said, the characters being either they're already in their prime or they're building up to their prime. We rarely ever get to see them. All right, I'm on my last legs. This is my last hurrah. I'm sucking wind, but maybe I got one last oomph in me. Let's just stick with Picard for a minute. And Derek, we'll start with you. So I'm just going to put my thoughts on it a little bit. So I thought Picard got off to a good start, but it felt like maybe it went a little bit sideways in the second half of the series because they sort of shifted storylines between the Borg and the androids. What was your take on sort of, did they stick the landing? Did they get it right? Sort of right? Mostly right? So? What did you think?
Well, two things. Really quick, to go back into the last question, I think also what's really cool about Picard is that it does something that's very unique, where you have the audience that is looking and almost in a sense pining for a nostalgic era, for the TNG era. And so is Picard. So is the actual character. And so you have a very unique situation where both audience and character are looking for the same things, are trying to reach back into the same things. But the reality is you can't. You may get moments and shadows of those moments, but that's not life. That's in the past. And you can't be Q and snap your fingers or slingshot around the sun. You can't. And I think that's what one of the elements, to answer your second question, that's one of the elements of Picard, where it does do a lot of different things. But if you look at the first and last episode of Picard, they're bookends. They're definite bookends. It begins and ends with Picard and his regrets and what he's feeling about Data. And a lot of that of the story is showing him he is learning he can't go back, and he has to let go of his regrets. And it takes a literal event at the end. I won't spoil it if anyone hasn't watched it, but a literal event for him to happen to him, and for him to have a discussion with Data, to him to learn you got to move forward. You have to move forward, and that's what we have to do. We can be nostalgic for those times, but we all have to move forward. And I think that's the most powerful, at least for me, message of Picard. Beyond the trappings, beyond seeing the Borg and all that, it's letting go, moving forward, remembering those times, cherishing those times, but taking those and going forward into the future.
Jarrah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the biggest challenges I had with Picard was its biggest promise at the top was the political dynamics, and is particularly the way that it was shining light on a refugee crisis, and at a time that was very topical. And I think that unfortunately that didn't really pan out in the rest of the season, that the beginning of the narrative was very complex, and then it got simplified until it was just good and evil again. And so to me, that was a bit of a disappointment. But overall, I think there was, a lot of I think one of the strengths was really like just so many tremendous character moments and just amazing dialogue, amazing acting. So there was a lot to really like about it, but unfortunately for me, there was just some holes towards the end of the season.
So let me, Keith, and we'll turn to you in a minute. And I want to do a little pivot in between Picard and Discovery, is that thematically within both shows, and we'll sort of take the android element of Picard, and especially season two of Discovery, where there was a lot of similarity between, there's a lot of fear and hatred of androids, right? Which in essence could be any race that's not you, right? I mean, and of course they kind of go fairly a fear of, the apocalypse coming, which I suppose with, a technological being, with AI, that is possible. What is your, AI stories have been around for generations, but are becoming more and more relevant because they're impacting us in a real way. So Keith, what do you think about sort of using the AI, the potential of the AI to go off to go all Skynet on us as being, a recurring storyline? Are you a yay, a nay, or you fall in the middle somewhere?
I wasn't thrilled with it. I think it worked better in Discovery than it did on Picard because in Discovery, it was a much more specific threat. It wasn't computers in general. It was this one particular AI. I thought the issues in Picard were a little too broad-based, especially given, what the Federation is supposed to stand for and what had already been the work that had already been done with the rights of artificial intelligences on both Next Generation with Data and on Voyager with the EMH. And so it felt like backsliding a little bit too much on Picard. I'm glad that they at least worked toward getting rid of it. Although that was another element of the end of the season that I thought didn't work. It was just after it being the synth ban being such an important part of the plot, to have it basically say, oh, and they ended the synth ban in a log entry in the last episode was kind of weak. I think it works better as, like I said, the specific threat of control, because that I think the metaphor worked better there too. The synth ban in Picard felt like it was a little too heavy-handed, and I think doing it with Romulan refugees would have worked better as a metaphor, and did work better as a metaphor in the story than banning all androids.
All right, fair enough. All right, so let's take a step back a little bit, and we had a chat about the four of us had a chat offline before we got into this. So recent incarnations of Trek, certainly Picard and absolutely, I think, Discovery, they felt a little bit more adult, a little bit less kid-friendly than in generations past. So while I don't think every sort of iteration of Star Trek has had its own touch and feel and tone to it, it's sort of in a slightly different stratosphere recently. So Jarrah, what are your thoughts there?
Sure. So I'm not a parent, but I've definitely heard from parent Star Trek fans who say, what I miss is Star Trek that I could sit down and watch with my kids. And certainly, I mean, there's episodes of recent Trek that I have found like quite disturbing as an adult, and had to take time to process. And that can be pretty challenging if you have little kids. Although I do know some people who do watch Disco with their kids, and I have friends that their kids are going to be Killy and Tilly for Halloween next year. But I think that it's partly related to just the way we consume media now is you don't have to all sit in front of the one TV and watch the thing all at the same time. And the plus side of this is that we have so many different iterations that you don't need to, all Star Trek doesn't have to just be necessarily geared towards exactly you anymore. So, there will be Star Trek, there is going to be Prodigy, that's going to be great. We can have things that explore different elements of the Star Trek universe from different perspectives. And as long as it kind of maintains that core value structure, that doesn't really bother me.
Derek, what about you?
Well, I would say I definitely agree with Jarrah. And one thing I've noticed is that as we have progressed, I think the inclination has been to incrementally make Star Trek in some respects darker, and I understand that. I understand that as a writer. And I think maybe the threats, if you're gonna make the antagonist darker, that's fine, but not the universe, not the world, not the protagonist, not the characters that we know and love. I think there's something to be said to in keeping the Star Trek mythology the way it's been primarily for the last 50 years. You know, these characters were bright, hopeful, and I think they should remain that way in the darkest of times. You can have darkness around them, but I don't think you should have them become dark. And and I would also, me personally, lean away from some. There were some scenes in Picard that were a little graphic, even for me. I was like, oh wow, that's a little graphic. And I can imagine if it's a little graphic for me, an old guy like me, then it probably would be for like a 10 or 12-year-old kid watching, Picard. So if I was to make any adjustment, it would be just to maybe take the edge off of that a little bit.
So as a follow-up, it's the same thing. And Keith, I want to hear from you. And this is kind of part two of the same theme. So Star Trek, since its very beginning, has always tackled tough themes: war, torture, slavery, and the more recent versions of Star Trek, I think partially because of just the special effects that are available. And for example, like the special effects on Discovery are phenomenal. And the image qualities and the sound quality that we have are far superior to earlier iterations. But as such, the tone, at least for me, and this is where I really struggled with the first two seasons of Discovery in particular in this way, is that the tone of the themes, not the themes themselves, but the tone and the execution of the themes have come across, to my mind anyway, as particularly brutal and cruel. I'm sorry, who was that from Discovery? I'm slipping my mind. The character who was the Klingon, but he was
Tyler.
I mean, let's face it. I mean, they tortured the shit out of him. I mean, and in a really, which is one, like, if this was, back in the day, Kirk had the operation, he was a Klingon and then he wasn't, or Vulcan, whatever it was, right? And they changed him. It was no big deal. But this was horrifying, brutal, pretty brutal stuff. What's your take on the depth and of the intensity of the visceral representation of some of those themes?
I think part of it is just the way television has changed to some extent. I mean, it's easy to forget this. 54 years ago, Star Trek was very adult for its time. That they were pushing the envelope of what they could do on NBC constantly. It was way more controversial in 1967 on NBC for Kirk to say, "Let's get the hell out of here," to actually use the word hell on television, than it was in 2017 for Tilly to say, "This is so fucking cool" on a streaming service. The standards are different. What people are expecting from television is different to some extent. I think that's dictating it. That doesn't mean they have to go that way. I think sometimes they have gone a little too far into the brutality of things. But it also, I think it's in service of giving them somewhere to go. Each season has ended with a hopeful ending. The first season ended with the war ending. The second season ended with the galaxy saved and right. the problem solved. The third season ended with solving a major problem, and I don't want to get into too much specifics if people haven't seen it, but suffice it to say, that's a hopeful ending too. So was Picard, the end of Picard's first season. All of them still wind up in Star Trek's default position, which is of hope and compassion. Sometimes, and this I know as a professional writer, this is a writer's trick. You start out by going really, really dark, and it gives you somewhere light to go to. Derek mentioned that too in his answer, and it's absolutely correct. I'm not sure if it's necessarily the best choice, especially for something that's supposed to be as optimistic as Star Trek is, to get as dark as Discovery and Picard have gotten, or as Deep Space Nine got a few times as well. But a utopia is also much more interesting if it's challenged. And I think that's when Star Trek has gone dark, it's been to do that, to challenge the utopia and hopefully come out of it better.
All right. So, and fair enough. All right. So we're living now in an age where inclusion in our sci-fi is not just an ideal, but to some, it's a mandate. but from its earliest days, going back to, like you said, Keith, Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov on the bridge, Star Trek has pushed the idea that race and gender and nationality shouldn't and don't matter. Although you could also argue that in those early days, the short skirts and Seven of Nine's catsuit, outfit maybe didn't quite meet some of those ideals. But let's address Discovery. Here we have a crew that is almost entirely female or POC. Other than Stamets, there's not a single white male on the crew and none on the bridge. That alone, to me, was just amazing on two levels. One, that a crew without your standard white male in charge, it works as well as it does. Like, you don't even really notice that this sort of like the white guy's not in charge. And I think, to me, that was great. And two, well, actually it's sort of combined, right? One, that it's there, and two, that it doesn't matter. What are you guys? So Jarrah, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important, and you'll see some people. We had someone comment on our blog, like it or not, cis white men make up a significant portion of the world's population and like deserve to be represented. And we're going like, okay, if you're going to start counting percentages of the world population here, you're going to have to do like a lot more disco to catch up with all the rest of the Star Trek history. I think it's great to see a crew on screen that looks like the cities we live in. And you can only expect that in the future, especially in a Star Trek future where racism is supposedly non-existent, that we will have more diverse communities. So I think that's great. And then more than that, it's not just like a numbers game, that these are all characters that have complex identities and that you want to see where they go next. And I think that particularly in the most recent season that has played out even more, and it's been good to see.
Derek?
Well, to, I guess, amend what Jarrah said and to go on what she said, you had Lorca first season, you had Pike second season, you had different white men, but they were, I guess, maybe antagonists in the third season. They're there because they should be there. They may not be in the roles that we have typically seen them on Star Trek and in television, but you know what? That's life. That's the real world. Not on every starship and in every situation, there doesn't have to be a white captain. I'm sorry, it doesn't have to be. And there shouldn't be, because that's just the way it is. Because what this is saying is that the best person for the job has the job, not the particular color. The best, let's hear this again, the best person, the best skilled person has the job. So, that's why there are so many women on the bridge. There's a reason why, the way I look at it, there's a reason there was so many women on the bridge, because those are the best. They applied for Discovery, they got the job, they're on the bridge. That's it. This is really nothing to discuss, in my opinion. That's why they're there. They should be there. In a future, inclusivity is a thing, because people of color, different species, different people, they all exist, and they ain't going nowhere. So that's the way it is.
For my position, it's great to see. All right, so let's move to one of the more probably the most divisive elements of Discovery.
Okay.
So Michael Burnham. So there's a lot of shouting out in the world about how Burnham is either A, bar none, the single most deserving character on Discovery to be the captain of Discovery, and there's just as much shouting that she's still a reckless rogue who, despite her willingness to put herself in harm's way, simply has not showcased that she is the right person to be the steady hand in the captain's chair. That the writers sort of had an agenda to put her there before she was actually ready. So what do you guys think? We'll start with Jarrah.
I think that's funny, the idea that like the writers had an agenda before she was ready, because the writers also write the character. We knew that was going to be the progression from the beginning of the discussion of season one. So, I think that the more that I reflect on the characteristics of previous Star Trek captains, the more I think that Michael exactly follows in that vein. Some of the things she did this season, I didn't love, but I think that, I didn't love that, Picard needed to get a Nausicaan to stab him in a bar fight to be a captain, to like make him more captainly. And, all these captains, we got Kirk and the Kobayashi Maru, except for because Star Trek was more episodic, you only got the one moment of them doing the like rebellious thing or the badass thing or going off on their own and taking over and saving the day against the regulations. But TV is the way it is now, and we have an arc, so we see that like actually, because it's more like people actually do, they go forward, they go back, they shift what's driving them. But ultimately it makes sense when you look at the number of like traumas and various decisions that she had to go through to get to this point, why she didn't make like super consistent decisions on the same criteria every single episode this season. So yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I don't think like, it's worth being like best captain of all time, worst captain of all time. I think it's just, people should take a look at the history of what kind of qualities we looked for in a captain before, and those qualities are still there.
Keith?
Like Jarrah said, the arc she was on from the very beginning, from the very first conversation we saw her having with Captain Georgiou, was that she was in line to become a captain, and then it got sidetracked by the whole, starting a war thing. But what happened at the end of season 3, when she was finally given command of the ship, was that's where the story was going. That was the progression that started in that first episode. And the fact that it's been consistently been going that way, despite the fact that there've been like 15 different changes in the writing staff on Discovery, is nothing short of amazing. But that's where the character's been going. Every other Star Trek lead that we've had has already been in place as captain when we first see them. So what I like about this is that we're seeing how she got there. We're seeing the progression that we never really, Kirk was already in charge of the Enterprise. Picard, this was his second command in Picard's case. Sisko was put in charge of DS9. Janeway was in charge of Voyager. Archer was in charge of Enterprise. Hell, Archer made a lot more stupid ass decisions in his time as captain of the Enterprise than Burnham ever has. Nobody's saying he doesn't deserve to be there. Well, maybe some people are, but actually, so am I, to be perfectly honest. He only got it because of who his father was, but that's a whole other discussion. So getting to actually see that progress is a nice change. No, she doesn't always make the best decisions, but neither have any of the rest of them. Kirk made plenty of dumbass decisions, including, when the cloud creature from Obsession came by and he acted like an idiot. Picard couldn't get past his trauma with the Borg in First Contact. Sisko couldn't get past his issues, PTSD with dealing with that Vulcan guy. He tried to beat him in baseball. Janeway was completely stubborn during the whole Year of Hell thing, although that was a race, but she was, and so on. You can find examples with every single Star Trek lead of dumb shit things they've done. But they're still the lead character, and that's what the lead character in a TV show does.
Keith? Derek?
I think you have to look at not what emotions we may have about the character, but what the character themselves are showing us, and Sonequa Martin Green's portrayal of Michael. So you had this young girl that, as far as she knew, both her parents were murdered by Klingons, pretty much in front of her eyes, or she heard it from being stuck in the closet. And then to deal with that trauma, she was sent to a planet where the way they deal with emotions and trauma is they repress them, right? So she spent about 15 years repressing how she felt about an incredibly traumatic event. So when you get to the Battle of the Binary Stars, she's looking at her family, her second family, being lost, and she loses it. And she does things that people a captain would never do that. But you have to look at her trauma. You have to look at what they are showing you about this character. And if you do that, you can look at the progression of Michael Burnham, and you can see that everything she's done has been true to that character from day one. she's had trauma upon trauma upon trauma, and she has gone from being this stoic, non-emotional person to now season 3, she's opened up incredibly. It's taken a lot of time. Now, you can argue, is she the best captain or worst captain? I'm not going to, say what I think. I think she maybe is probably somewhere in the middle. But I do think that you can look at her and you can see the progression, and I think the progression makes sense for the character. And I think that's all you can really ask for. And I think that's all you can ask for in all of the Star Trek captains, is that you can look at the progression, you can see their actions, and that they make sense from season to season, from beginning to end.
All right. Well, okay. So that's great. But as we do it every time in the show, we are going to go to a quick interlude. If you have any more questions or comments, I see them coming in. We're going to get to them soon. Send them in. But as we always do on the show, it is time to spin the wheel. All right. We are ready. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created especially for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Beam Me Up Scotty, Reporting for Duty, Resistance is Frugal, Crew Stew, Michael Burnham's Day Off, Giorgio on My Mind, and Future Kirk. All right, Derek, you're up first. Ready?
Ready. Let's do it.
All right, and you get Reporting for Duty. Okay, what do we got here? Let's see, what did even, okay. You can serve on the crew of any Star Trek starship from any period of any series. Which ship would you choose?
Oh, okay. It has to be a starship.
You can pick, let's say, the command center.
Okay. I would say Defiant because it's Cisco, or Pike because both of them are really, really good captains, and they are pretty complete as human beings and individuals. I love Kirk, but I think if I was wearing a red shirt, I wouldn't survive that long. So Cisco or Pike.
Okay, right on. Okay, all right. Jarrah, you're up next. You ready?
Yep.
All right, what do we got? All right, and you got Future Kirk. All right, so what do we got here? What did I do? I can't even remember. All right, James T. Kirk had well-known issues making his peace over the years to accept the Klingons and no longer being his enemy. How do you think he would fare if he were transported into the future in the galaxy in which Discovery is facing?
In season 3 or season 1?
Pick.
Okay. Okay, well, I feel like he would be more challenged in season 1. And
Sure.
although, maybe he would fit right in because it's just like, oh, hey, sudden war with the Klingons. This sounds great.
This is my thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's okay, there's so many paradoxes there because then he wouldn't have built up the same resentment at the Klingons yet at that time in history. Okay, we're just going to transport him way into the 39th century or wherever they're in season 3 and say that I think he would do better than McCoy, who would just be really like way too much technology. Like, what are these like gel sensors that like control the whole ship? And I think Kirk is like, he's good at just kind of fake it till you make it swagger, so he'd probably be fine.
All right, fair enough. All right, Keith, you ready?
Yep.
Let's do it up. And what do we got here? Round and round. She goes where she stops. Nobody knows. All right, you got. Oh, no, we already got you. That was Reporting for Duty. So you're going to get Resistance is Frugal. All right.
I want to know what that is.
Okay. Quark gets assimilated by the Borg. But Quark being Quark, the Borg collective doesn't quite find itself merging with his cheap and greedy ways. Describe the characteristics of Quarkonius of Borg.
Just taking basically Borg cubes to every single planet and assimilating all their money. And there's plenty of space in the Borg cube to pile up the piles of latinum for him. That would not be a problem. So yeah, I think that it just go from place to place and just wipe out the treasury of every single place. The rest of the board can assimilate the people. That's fine. They can do that, but he wants all the money.
All right, fair enough. All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience. I got a bunch here. All right, so for anyone who wants to chime in, I've been binge watching the Star Trek movies, and I've been enjoying some more than others. What books or comics would you recommend to someone new to the Star Trek universe, specifically Next Gen?
I'm going to be slightly self-serving, but only about 1/9 self-serving. If you're a fan of Next Generation, I would recommend the A Time To series, which came out in 2004. It was a 9-book series that basically filled the gap between the movies Star Trek Insurrection and Star Trek Nemesis. Those books basically had the Enterprise dealing with a bunch of different issues. There were 9 books altogether. They were written by John Vornholt, by Dayton Warden, Kevin Dillmore, by Robert Greenberger, by David Mack, and then I wrote the last volume, which brought it all up to Nemesis, basically. There's some really good stories in there, some good high adventure science fiction stories, and it's a good sort of, we never really got to see much of the Enterprise E. We only saw it, in 3 movies every couple of years, and that was it. So it was a chance to sort of see the Next Generation crew after the TV show, but before Nemesis.
All right, so here's one. I'll leave it to you guys. I'm not sure if I missed this because I am always late. Purpose of Georgiou in season 3, needed or waste?
This is a good question. I saw someone post a tweet earlier this season that said, can someone please explain why Georgiou is awesome other than the fact that she's Michelle Yeoh? And I was like, oh crap, that is really the main reason that I cite, is just that I love watching Michelle Yeoh kick shit.
Do you need another reason though?
But then I was talking to one of my friends about this, and she said that no, the purpose of Michelle Yeoh, of Georgiou in season 3 particularly, is to show the environment versus individual identity conflict, that she's someone who was raised in this massively authoritarian, cruel environment that is thrown into the most idealistic environment. People that really value everything that she was taught are basically stupid, frivolous values, and she does really change. So she was saying that for her, the purpose of Georgiou this season was getting to see someone who you would think isn't going to change, and she doesn't fully shift, but she makes a significant shift towards the more enlightened values of the Prime universe and the people that, because of the people that show her trust and love and empathy and respect.
All right.
I think she served one other purpose in the season, which was to help show that Saru was right to be made captain, because most of the rest of the crew already knew and respected Saru. She didn't. And he was able to keep her in line and keep her from going off the reservation too badly. And she came to respect him. And I think that was an important hurdle for Saru to jump over and on his journey to becoming the captain of the ship finally.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Okay, so I got one last question, which I didn't get to, and then we'll wrap up. So a favorite of mine personally is Tig Notaro's Jet Reno. She brings this sort of lunch pail quality as a foil to the kind of the more erudite Stamets. As far as I'm concerned, we need Tig Notaro on the screen as often as possible. Who are some of your favorites? Give me some unsung heroes here.
On Discovery?
Any series where you think a character maybe gets slightly underplayed or overlooked?
Well, I like Reno. I mean, if we're going to stick with Discovery, I like Reno. I think she's the McCoy of Discovery. She had that same mindset. And it's interesting because, that era, she's really from the TOS era. When you really think about it, it's only a 10-year difference, right? Even though they're now in the 32nd century. So I like her a lot. People had problems with Tyler. I like Tyler, not just because, we share a name, but, but I like the character. And if there is actually going to be a Section 31 show, I would like to see if he actually has an arc other than to basically be, a supporting character for Burnham. And, I want to see what he can do on his own as an individual and as an actor. So.
All right, right on. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for your contributions. Now we're going to turn to our advice column. So we're all writers to various degrees. So for anyone, and this is going to be a little bit more specific to Star Trek. All right, for anyone who's writing for or creating Star Trek, what's the best advice you would pass on? Start with Keith.
Remember that, back to what I said to answer the first question, honestly, just remember that this is a universe where the solution should come from a place of compassion. This isn't the place to write a story about how my ship can fire more phasers than your ship.
I would like to. I'm sorry, you finished?
No, I was done. You're good.
I would also say that I know a lot of people have ideas of what characters should and shouldn't do in Star Trek. That's not the way to go. The way to go in Star Trek is to look at what's done on screen, look at what those writers are telling you about those people, and start from there and then go forward. Don't bring your idea and say, well, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make them in a, certain kind of relationship, or I'm going to make them angry about it. That's not what they're showing you. Look at what they are honestly showing you and then go forward from that point. And I think you'll be able to honestly write Star Trek.
Jarrah?
I would say don't try to just write it all down and not run it by anyone else and think that's going to be great. Reach out to other people, especially people from the backgrounds of the characters you're writing. I think that one of the reasons that new Star Trek has transitioned, I think, more or less successfully from some of the tokenization we saw in previous series to more fulsome, complex representation of characters that feel more real is because of the diversity in the writer's room and behind the scenes in general. And regardless of that, also just all of us do better with a second pair of eyes to catch things that we missed and see if things, feel real to someone from a different perspective.
All right, so this has been a great hour, and before we wrap up, it's time to do a little shameless promotion, as we like to do here. So I'm going to do a little share screen here, and we're going to see what everyone's got for us. All right, so as I said before, guys, help me if you're seeing. Are you seeing my screen now?
No.
No.
How about
there we go. We got it.
All right, so here we go. So Keith, what do we got?
My latest book is a collaboration between myself and Dr. Manish K. Batra. It's a thriller. It's my first thriller novel. It's called Animal, and it's sort of Dexter if it had been created by PETA. It's about a serial killer who hunts people who harm animals. It is much different from my usual. It's a much nastier, more visceral novel than I usually write. But it's also got elements of my work that people have seen before. In particular, it's very much a police procedural because it's about an Interpol agent and two California detectives who are going after this guy. And it's got a lot of nasty stuff in it, and all of it is taken from real life. There is several examples of animal cruelty in the book that are real and pretty much non-fictional. So that's on sale right now from Wordfire Press. It's just called Animal. It's available from all the usual online retailers.
All right, right on. All right, Keith, what do we got?
No, I already went.
Oh, sorry, Derek. I mean,
Derek.
I'm the one with the beard.
and the hair.
And the hair.
And the hair. That's it. Oh, you're the one.
Coming out from the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, Turning the Tide. It's basically taking characters that are in public domain and writing a story about them. I've taken Sherlock Holmes, and I've written a story about Sherlock Holmes. The character is currently 134 years old, and I've written a story that has not been touched on or done in any way in 134 years. I've added 5 different elements to the character that no one's ever done before. So I think it's going to be exciting and unique, and I think something that everyone will enjoy if they pick it up. It's coming out March 13th as well.
Excellent. All right, Jarrah, what do you got here?
Awesome. Well, next Tuesday, January 26th at 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern, my co-host and I will be hosting a 2-hour virtual class as part of the Seattle International Film Festival's education program on how to evaluate women's costumes in Star Trek. So we're going to look at the history of women's costumes and, who designed them and who they were designed for, and, comments that people have made about how they have felt to play them. And complicate some of the notions, right? Like, for example, the mini skirts, they were both empowering at the time, and also, some people did have challenges with them, maybe not the most ideal for some of the actual missions you were on. So we're going to talk about what kind of criteria can you use to evaluate women's costuming in Star Trek in particular. We'll have some audience participation. It's a sliding scale, and if you go to the SIF website and look under education, you can find out how to sign up.
All right, right on. That should be a great one. All right, and as for me, okay, since we've been talking about sci-fi and some space opera, I've got some of my own. So if you're into it, you can check out Crosslines. Got tons of, I think, a bunch of great female characters who give the boys a run for their money and more. Crosslines about a modern-day space pilot thrust into a parallel Earth caught between rebellion, Armageddon, and a desperate fight to get home. And of course, last but not least, if sci-fi mystery is more your game, Crackle and Fire, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic Private Eye Angela Hardwick, who is part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, and part Philip Marlowe. They are both available on the usual channels and published by Crazy 8 Press. Okay, so I want to thank everyone who's been here tonight. I want to thank the panel. Thank you, Jarrah, Keith, and Derek for a great show, and for everyone who's been watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and as always, I will see you guys next week.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. Hope you had a good time.